All right, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. We have Sylvia Morales Gutierrez, Stan Glazer, Gus Rowena, and Bernard. I apologize. I don't want to massacre your last name. Hershevsky. I apologize for that. From the resident side, on the county side, we have obviously everyone from our office. Me, Anthony Escaro, the commissioner, Raquel Regalado. We have Diallo Brian, which has been working on this very closely with the residents. We have Luis Lopez, which is my aide, Amanda Maldonado, which does more than she should at our office. Phenomenal. Carol, and that's from our office. And then we have Alfonso from the county attorney's office, Miguel Soria from DTDW, and we also have Javier Bustamante, which is the chief of right-of-way, which is directly related to this stuff. I'm going to let the commissioner start us off, but all of the questions, all of the answers are going to come from our staff, right there. Javier and the county attorney will go through what we have been preempted, the expedited permitting, all of those different things with the commissioner. And Commissioner, there you go.
Thank you, Tony.
Oh, and also we will be, I apologize, we will be recording this so that we can transmit this to whomever is interested in listening to this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for making the time. I know that you've been dealing with my amazing staff on this. You know, this is a very difficult topic for us because as we're going to be explaining, and we really want staff to tackle it so that they can give you kind of the historical perspective. This is something that we get complaints about, and obviously we've been preempted. We want to hear directly from you. We want to answer your questions. We have been trying to find solutions, and we'll be talking about that, you know, after the presentation. But we want you to know that we are listening. We have been responsive, and to just give you a perspective of like how we got here and then what our options are. And just so that you know, we don't agree with this, and we have been very adamant about that. You know, we're really working very hard to fight preemption at the state level, to really educate our
You know what? Listen, I hung up on it. I hung up on it. No. I hung up. I'm not on it. I'm not on it. I got out of it. I got out of it.
Oh, okay. Well, if you can mute yourself, and then, you know, you can, when we ask questions, you can unmute yourself. That'll be, that would be great. So anyway, I want to kick it off to staff. I want to thank you all for your time. We're here to take your questions. And we wanted you to hear from the different departments that kind of deal with this, because I know that there's been some misinformation on the county's role. So I'll just pass it off to staff so that they can explain kind of how we got here, and then we can take your questions directly and answer them with their assistance.
Sure, Commissioner. This is Javier Bustamante. If you'd like, I can go first. DTPW Assistant Director.
Yeah, Sylvia, we were talking about Sylvia kind of giving us historical.
Sure, no problem.
I think Sylvia dropped off. Let me call her real quick. Just give me one quick moment.
Okay. Javier, I mean, well.
So unfortunately, it's she's not answering. So
Okay.
Go ahead, Javier, and give us a little background, and then we'll go back to the residents.
You're on, sir.
Sure, sorry. Yeah, so a little bit background. Previous to the 2019 amendment to the statute, our department, our permitting department that is in charge in DTPW, Department of Transportation and Public Works, whose purview is to permit anything in the public right-of-way, in the county public right of way, would review these applications and make comments, requirements, policies about where these things could be installed, as these things were coming to become a kind of a new technology. Of our understanding of these is that these towers, these 5G towers, are needed to be spaced within a certain proximity to get the proper bandwidth or expansion. Usually they're installed by companies like Crown Castle that then go and kind of sell off the rights on the tower to different cell providers like your Verizons and your T-Mobiles and so forth and so on. And so these repeaters, these towers, usually 20-foot towers, concrete, some are steel, have begun to be installed in 2017, 2018, and our permitting department started seeing more and more of these and make certain requirements, certain policies, like they had to be on arterial roads, they had to be along commercial corridors, they would not be placed in residential neighborhoods, so forth and so on. And then, of course, all of your safety requirements. Miguel Soria on the line is our AD over highway design. They would look at it for certain requirements as to ADA compliance, to make sure the sidewalk had ADA compliance, line of sight, that they're not installed in certain clear zones and in corners that could create safety for vehicular traffic, safety conditions for pedestrians, and so forth and so on. So there was the requirements of these being arterial roads only, and the requirements that they not be in residential areas, and then all of the safety requirements. We were then preempted in 2019, where the authority, us, the county, would not have that permission, and I'm sure you guys have kind of looked into this, that we cannot tell them in what areas they could be located, in what neighborhoods or what zoning, and so forth and so on. That we would only be able to deny an application for the safety requirements. And so since 2019 and moving forward to 2024, this is where our reviewers can only hang on to is the tower being placed in a clear zone, in not meeting ADA, not meeting the spacing, but could not look at any more about, well, this is being placed in a residential neighborhood or in front of a home or so forth and so on. So we kind of got preempted on that. And so we've not been able to do what we were doing since prior to 2019. That's where we are so far. We are still looking at the opportunity. The statute is quite long, and our legal team is here, but we're working with our legal team to see in that 14-day review period, could our reviewers be a little more stringent about saying, hey, pretty please, could you not install at this location? It's not a requirement of denial, but it could possibly be a requirement of the county to ask not to put it in front of a residential home, or to locate it in between lot lines, and to locate it in spaces like that. But again, if the utility decides to install it, we cannot, we would not be able to ability to deny the permit, and they could install it technically in front of a residential home if they so wish to, under the current statute. So I don't know, anybody have any questions so far?
Yes, thank you for that explanation. I appreciate the level of detail. And I understand that we understand this is a state statute. It's a state law that was passed back in 2019. But a lot of things that are either perceived to be compliant or required to be compliant don't seem to be being met on the one hand. On the other hand, it's a little bit concerning that the county, and I understand your position, but it's a little bit concerning that less than a year ago, there was a resolution passed to expedite the permitting of these poles. And it seems that was done in a very, I don't know, quiet manner, but rather than tapping the brakes on these poles going up, the resolution actually accelerates that.
It's actually, I thought the same. I apologize for interrupting you, Mr. Rovena. I thought the same thing until I spoke with my attorney earlier today, believe it or not. And she gave me a perspective that's a little different because of the way that the statute is written. Anari, can you explain that detail real quick?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So the statute provides timelines for review. And those timelines are not met, the applications are deemed approved. I'll go through them. We receive an application, the county has 14 days to review and determine whether the application is complete or not. Within those 14 days, we have to notify the applicant if the application is incomplete and provide details as to what's missing. If we don't do that within the 14 days, by statute, the application is deemed complete and we are not able to request or require the additional information. After that 14 days, or let me correct that, starting from the date of receipt, so with inclusive of those 14 days, the county has 60 days to review the application. So we receive an application. The first 14 days, we have an ability to review and determine whether it's complete or incomplete and notify the applicant. If we don't say anything, or if it is complete, then on day 14, deemed complete. We go back to day 1. From day 1 to day 60, we have the time to review the application and either approve or deny. We have an ability to extend for an additional 30 days if the applicant agrees to it, and if we don't use the first 30 days to negotiate a new location for the facility. So normally we have 60 days from the date of receipt to review, determine if it's incomplete, notify them if it's incomplete, and approve or deny. And at most 90 days if we don't use up those first 30 days to renegotiate a new location, and if the applicant agrees to that extension. If we don't approve or deny within that window, the application is automatically by statute deemed approved. So, and staff can advise as to how long it takes to review these applications, how many applications we have, but without the additional permitting individual dedicated for these applications, if we miss those deadlines, then these applications are deemed automatically per statute approved, and the county can't deny them, even if they don't meet the ADA requirements, the line of sight requirements, the failure to comply with the different codes that are applicable. So meeting those timelines is very, very important, because otherwise the very limited scope that the county has to review and deny, we would lose that opportunity as well.
Right.
Understood. Have any applications been denied?
We can't deny it.
So then what's the point of expediting them?
It's not expediting. It's having what it works out to be is actually having the carrier that is installing them pay for somebody to look at them, and then for us to have the time to be able to review, which is almost non-existent, and be able and have somebody that we can go to say this, that, or the other. Otherwise, it's going to go through the normal process, and all of them are likely going to be approved through the inability of us to get to them. Is that about right, Mr. Bustamante?
Correct, Anthony. Yes. So we have 4 staff members for over 9,000 applications in one last fiscal year, 9,000 plus applications. This year, we believe we will cross well into 11,000 applications and continuing to increase every year. 4 plans reviewer, permanent positions, and that contract, what it allowed us to do was to go get an independent plan reviewer to hire somebody to help staff review these, and like the team said, Anari and Anthony, review them for line of sight to make sure they're meeting ADA compliance and so forth and so on that limited scope to help us make sure, because if not, they're automatically approved.
Okay, so basically the citizen has no input and no challenge, no right to challenge. All that's waived.
By the state, correct.
Okay. And the fact
we're
that
in a really tough spot here. That's just the honest truth.
Yeah, we are in a community that's underground. We have 0 wire, 0 poles, Everything here is underground. Isn't there some kind of a, I'm not going to say, I'm not an attorney, so I wouldn't know what the proper word is, a resolution or some kind of a restriction on communities that are underground to then all of a sudden have poles erected at will, indiscriminately, by one company or by 5 companies? Because what Crown Castle is doing now, their competitor could come do next week. And if there's one pole for Crown Castle, who's to say that there won't be a second pole for the next competitor on the same street right next to this pole? So theoretically, we may end up with 50 poles in our neighborhood or 100 poles in our neighborhood.
Mr. Bustamante, can you address that?
Mr. Rovina, you correct. Could another company come? Yes. Prior to 2019, we used to require them to locate this cabinet and this cell phone technology on an existing FPL pole. We no longer are allowed to say that. So if there was an FPL pole that had your regular street lighting, we would make them co-locate on that pole. So we don't. It seems Crown Castle's taken the business approach of putting their own facility with their own pole. That way, they're not subject, if that pole needs to come down for a relocation for whatever reason, they're not subject to having to deal with FPL or whoever owns that other utility pole. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, somewhat, but I mean, it's still not clear as to what would restrict, or if these companies can be restricted from indiscriminately just erecting poles at will. It seems like it seems like the state created a law that just took us to the Wild West and said, you guys go out there and do whatever you want. At least that's the way it seems like it's being handled. I understand what you're referring to with the permitting process and the lack of speed of the process, but that still doesn't prevent the action from occurring, just occurring quicker, that's all.
If I can interject. So listen, and I get your frustration, and we deal with this on every preemption that we challenge the state on. The state prohibits us from taking any action. And it's very frustrating, and they can eliminate the process. In this case, as was being explained, they've preempted our ability to have any input as to where these things land, how many, in what neighborhood, in what fashion. They kept the shell of a permitting process, but that permitting process is null and void if we don't get it done within their time period. And the reason that we want to participate in what is a shell of a process, right, is because in the future, at least we have a legal leg to stand on, because there is a process and we did input and we did say, in terms of the ADA, for example, that it was violating the ADA or it was violating something else. So it's better to have some documentation, even if they don't have to listen to it, even if they can ignore it, at least so that the county can create a record, because that's all this application is. When we talk about expediting, we're not expediting anything. They have it as of right. They don't need our permission. They don't need our permit. If we don't give them a permit, they put it in wherever they want. That is the nature of this whole, this is a soup to nuts preemption, right? They don't need our permit. But what we're doing is we're going through the permitting process just so that there is a record of our dissent, right? So that as we continue talking to our attorneys, as you all, and we bring this up to our state legislature, we can prove that this is impacting our communities and that it's negative and that there are these other unintended consequences far beyond, the aesthetic of the polls. So that's really where we're at. I don't, and I know that sounds a little counterintuitive because we named it expediting, but if we don't go through the steps, they get it anyway. So currently, and again, if you want to change that, I'm willing to consider changing that. But as an attorney, I'm telling you that it's better to have input, even if that input is ignored, because it stands as a record, as opposed to not having input You know, I'm sure that the county commission would like to see our permitting folks do something else, given that there's nothing to say here. But I think that given our disdain for this, it is best for us to maintain as much of a record as possible.
I appreciate that, Commissioner, but what kind of a record are you creating to be able to then fight later on? And the reality is, or is there any chance that once several dozen or several hundred of these poles are erected, that they're going to be mandated to be knocked down? We know the likelihood of that is probably zero. So why, rather than just, according to what you're saying, wouldn't it be better from a perception perspective to just say, okay, you guys do what you want. We don't agree with this. You guys do what you want. Be reckless. Put up these poles against the best interest of the community. We don't agree with it. Rather than turning around and helping them do this, I don't understand the purpose of why the help in the expediting the permits. I still don't get that.
But we're not helping them. We're not helping them. We're providing input as to the placement in the hope that they will listen to the recommendation. And like I said, you know, if we want to extract ourselves from that conversation, we can. And that's something that we can consider. I just don't see how that's to the benefit of anyone. Because, and I guess maybe, you know, Javier, you can speak to, do they even listen to the recommendations? So like if in the instances where they have been committing an ADA violation, do they listen to that if it's in the record? Maybe that's a better way to kind of deal with that. Like, is the input, even though they don't have to listen to us, do they every now and then listen to us? Is the question posed.
Yeah, as to ADA, line of sight, clear zone, those safety concerns, they must listen to us. And our inspectors go out there and confirm that the pole has the certain distance required from the edge of curb to meet ADA. Our inspectors do go inspect once an application is completed, approved, and the construction is completed to close the permit. They do go and confirm they've met the ADA, they've met the location. We have found poles to be installed incorrectly. They had posted the pole would be in a certain location per the plans, and the pole was in the wrong location. The inspector wrote them up, and the pole was dug out and removed and relocated to the location where it was. And it was off by a few feet or whatever it was. But they were not meeting the compliance for clear zones and so forth and so on. So they do listen to that, to our restricted, limited scope under the statute as to those safety standards.
And just so we're clear, if we didn't provide the permit process, we wouldn't provide that input.
Correct. If we wouldn't, we would just ignore that, then somebody in a wheelchair would come through that sidewalk and would not have the distance required to get through because an impediment would have been there. So we would have neglected our duties to ensure that our citizens could get through there, through that sidewalk. And that is our requirement, to ensure that, you know, the ADA compliance is met and line of sights, clear zones of vehicles don't derail off the road and hit the pole because they have to be set at a certain distance, or they don't become an obstacle at an intersection where you cannot see oncoming traffic. So that is our requirement.
I'm not sure of what ADA.
I think the attached 22 of this expedited process, quote unquote expedited process, is it's the only way that, one, we're not paying for the people that are actually reviewing, right? Because we would have to pay for that. You would have to pay for that. They're paying for it. And then two, we have somebody that's watching, looking at each individual one within the time period, the very limited time period that we're given by the state. Otherwise, we're really not going to be able to do that at all. And these are just going to get approved and approved and approved by expiring time.
And in none of these cases, there's a concern or a requirement to notify the residents?
In what, I don't understand that.
A pole goes up. I live 2 houses down from Mr. Glasser. I left here one morning at 8 in the morning, and regular drive out, when I come back, there's a pole in his house.
That's an interesting question, and I think it's best answered by Anari. Which what can be done with respect to giving notice of these permits? Are we preempted from giving notice?
We are preempted from requiring that the applicant give notice. If we, the county, has and is able to give notice, we can choose to do so, but we cannot require the applicant unless state law changes to provide notice to the residents.
And then there's a
So why
cost.
hasn't, sorry.
And then there's a cost associated with that to the county.
Of course.
So why hasn't the county notified the residents? Why did they make the decision not to notify? Is it purely cost related?
Anari,
No,
if
I don't
you-
think that decision's been made. There's no big decision made one way or the other, right?
Right.
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. Anari, if you could walk us through the timeline, like we're not required to give notice. We're not giving notice, right? Is my understanding. Now, could we give notice? I mean, that's the question as we try to find solutions, right? Could we give notice? What's the timeline for that? When do we find out about the placement? And then how long would it take us to send out a notice, even if we pay for it? This is not about like the financial burden of it. It's like, when do we find out and how could we send notice? Because we could create a vehicle, right? Where we send notice. Now, again, there's no, you're just going to have notice. There's no vehicle for us to do anything other than give you notice. But if notice is something that will make people feel more comfortable with this, then I'm happy to do it. But what's the timeline and how would that work?
Commissioner, pursuant to the statute, from the day we get an application to the date of approval, unless there's an extension, it's 60 days. I would have to defer to Javier and his team as to when during that period we would know the location of a pole and whether it would be feasible to send out notice during that period before the construction begins.
Sure. I mean, is it feasible? Sure. It's just the effort, the time, and obviously there's be a cost implication on it. Could we do it? I'm sure it could be done. It would just at some point when the application's received, reviewed, there would have to be a process to locate what is the residential neighborhood or the area where it's being posted, and then mail out notices to all of those within a certain distance of the installation of that project. It can be done. It just we would have to kind of take back and see when within that window of application is it sufficient where the reviewer has reviewed, given whatever comments as to the safety requirements, and at that point when we're prepared to approve the permit, send that notice out. And in that short window, the notice goes out. Again, it would not do anything. It would just inform the neighborhood that there is a project by a certain applicant to install 1, 2, 5, 10 of these poles in their immediate neighborhood.
It seems like the practicality of it doesn't really impact the potential effectiveness or lack thereof anyway with that short time frame.
When you have 60 days to approve a permit, I mean, it's next to impossible to do something that will effectively assist to do something about that. Perfect.
But
Well, I mean, Tony, and sorry to interrupt, I would say I wouldn't even say approve a permit. And maybe one of the things that we have to consider is changing the language around this topic, right? When you have 60 days to review an application, because at the end of the day, we're not approving or denying, right? Much of anything. But the question is, like, what vehicle could we create to give people the opportunity to provide input, right? And what does that look like? So we're just kind of going through the traps, right? So, I mean, I think this is an important conversation, and that's why we wanted you to have it like with staff and kind of like, let's walk through, like, within the limitations that we have with the statute, what can we do and what can be effective, right? How, is there anything that can be done? So we kind of, if the notice thing, like, there's not a lot of time there. And then what happens with that notice? Like, we would provide you notice, but you couldn't like come to a meeting or speak, right? I mean, what do
Yeah.
you do with this, right? So that's an issue. Maybe there's a way to provide access to the comments, right? Maybe that's a way that we can do it. One of the things that we have been doing is taking the notice and providing it on a website. Maybe there's a way to provide kind of the details. So to your point, how many of these were in violation of the ADA? How many polls have been put up? You know, maybe there's a way to get that information, not necessarily because we can do anything about it, but maybe that's something that we can take to our representatives in Tallahassee, right? Maybe that's some information that you all can use in terms of this many polls up in this much time, right? I mean, you're living it, so you see them, but maybe, and this is to staff, is there some data that we can collect from this process to help kind of advocate against this process?
Sure, Commissioner. This is something we could probably work with our GIS county partners and probably put onto a public site where people can come and see where these have been installed. We could upload the locations and represent them through a GIS application that could help kind of with pinpoints of where the location of these poles have been installed, and probably some basic information about who the applicant is, the year, date when they were installed, and the permit number or approval.
Right. And that way the person can look up the permit, right? You know, so I mean, to the point of, we started the conversation about notice saying, I went to work, I came back, there was a pole. That's crazy, right? We all agree. But given that sending notice about that pole really doesn't solve our issue,
No.
after the fact, could there be like a registry? Could there be a data collection that then allows, you know, us to go into that and send it to our legislators, right? And say, look, this many poles in our neighborhood, this is when they went up, you know, this is their condition. Because that's another thing. Right now we're dealing with new poles, but there is maintenance, right? There are other things associated with these poles. So I think that information might be useful, because one thing is the anecdotal, this is the pole in my street and here is the picture, here are the two poles, or this is what my neighbor is suffering. And another thing is kind of a pan out where we're able to harness that data and then use it to advocate as to why this particular preemption is damaging to our neighborhoods. So to the team, do I need to bring legislation on that? Happy to do it. In order to create that data registry, or can we do that without me bringing legislation?
We have all our permits. Luckily, since 2019, we've gone completely online. So all of that information is available through our ITD team. And what we can do is extract that information and represent it through a GIS layer and open that data, like a lot of the stuff that is already open data that the county produces. We can work on doing that.
Okay.
Commissioner, to your point, I think the key word you said is information. There's been a lot of lack of information in this whole process. And if you read the resolution that was signed in June, and you only read that resolution, I can form a position and an opinion. Having heard what you said just a few minutes ago, I have a lot more broadness and a lot more knowledge of why this resolution says what it says. But I don't have that just by reading it. So the lack of information starts the cycle of, you know, the communities. Politically, it's a bad thing. It's really a bad thing when you have all of these people already forming an opinion, right or wrong. And from what I'm hearing you say, it's the wrong opinion that we're forming for the right reason, but with the wrong basis. At the end of the day, what we're looking for is a solution. And hopefully you can help us achieve that.
Yes, and happy to. And listen, we are as frustrated as you are, right? We really, our hands are tied. And we've been working with our attorneys to see if there's anything that we can do to provide some sort of remedy, right? And to provide some sort of advocacy. Definitely, I'm going to bring an item asking the state in their next session to undo this preemption. What they do with that request, I can't, but I can make it, part of our legislative agenda. I can ask my colleagues to support it. I know we will have support from Higgins, who, like me, is plagued with these things. And we have spoken about these at committee numerous times on how frustrating it is that these things are dropped in our neighborhoods. So in that sense, I'm happy to bring something and see if that moves some folks in Tallahassee. I'm also going to talk to our local electeds about it and see if some flexibility can be provided. Definitely a notice, would be helpful. But even if we got the notice, if the process didn't allow for a rejection, of the infrastructure, then what's the point of the notice, right?
It's pointless.
So,
it's just spending money. That's all.
right. So I think, I think the first step is, to have the county take an official position, and we would want your support, to get the other commissioners on board. Not every district understands this, because not every district has this problem, right? So that's the first, piece of advocacy. And I think the data will help us, because the data will show where the nuisance has come and the impact that it has. And I think data will also show the impact that it has on sidewalks. I mean, look, there's places in Miami-Dade County, including in my district, where they don't even have sidewalks, right? So they're going to be like, well, I wish I had a sidewalk problem. So that's kind of the, unfortunately, these are the issues when we kind of pan out, but I think generally most residents would agree that you don't want to show up one day from work and have something, like outside your house, without any sort of notice or input. So I think we can all agree on those two things. And I know that we've been helping, put together meetings so that you all can meet with our state reps and kind of voice, your concerns about this, to see if there can be some course correct, right? There can be some course correct as to the decisions that they've made in the last few years.
I have a quick question. Are communities like Coral Gables and Pinecrest, Aventura susceptible to these polls also?
Yeah, that's it. This is a preemption from the state to all the legal bodies below them. Is that accurate, Aneri?
Yes, it's a preemption to all governmental entities that are reviewing these type of permits.
Yeah, it's not an unincorporated Dade County only situation. It affects all municipalities and all counties throughout the state.
One of the concerns we have also, they say that 5G doesn't cause cancer, but it hasn't been around a long time.
Sure.
There aren't a lot of studies on it right now. And this pole was placed right next to my fence by our bedrooms, and I am a cancer survivor. And there are other people in the neighborhood whose loved ones are battling cancer or have beaten it, and it's concerning.
Yep.
Agree. Another interesting thing, since we bring up other jurisdictions that we may want to consider, is when we look at the data, where are these being installed? And because, and I guess, Javier, maybe you can answer some of this. The fact that this neighborhood doesn't have poles, is that part of what we're seeing? Like if there was another mechanism, because we were talking about earlier, and I know internally we've discussed it, the placement of some of these things, it varies based on the topography, but then also the infrastructure existing. So where are we seeing, this pop up? And is there a nexus between the situation in that neighborhood and kind of the intrusion?
Hey, Commissioner, good question. I wish that was, because this neighborhood didn't have poles was the reason. We've asked Crown Castle, and we used to require Crown Castle to co-locate so that we didn't have just abundancy of poles up and down sidewalks, and we would require them to hang these on existing poles. They have decided to put in their own facility. So to answer your question, with or without poles, neighborhoods with or without existing overhead poles, they're still going ahead and placing their own facilities, what we're finding, their own independent pole.
And in terms of the range, right? Is there a particular like provider? Are there gaps in service that lead them to kind of choose these areas? Do we know that? Do we know kind of what brings them to certain parts?
Yeah, so we understand their requirement to get the best service out of these poles. They eventually have to be within 500 feet of each other. Obviously, they're not there. They're just putting these poles where they believe they have the most market for people who will need, wireless services via Wi-Fi, via not direct cable connection. So I think they do their market research, find where they have not a signal, and where they can sell their service to cell phone providers, the T-Mobiles, the Verizons, the Xfinity, or whatever they're called now, Comcast. So they do their own market research and locate these wherever they can get the most, I would say, bang for their buck.
One thing here, now that you mention that, Crown Castle's policy, or one of their policies, is to, quote, blend into their surroundings and preserve the aesthetics of their environment. Could the violation of that policy be a reason to reject the permit?
No. I'll let the attorneys answer that, or Javier, but my understanding is that it is not.
No, they're very limited design requirements, and blending in means looking like the other poles in the area, including other concrete poles. So no, that in itself is not.
We don't have any poles.
There are no poles in the area, so there's nothing to blend in with.
You can't deny it because there are no other poles. I understand it's frustrated the way it's written, but
perhaps their policy is what influenced the state or local governments to make the decisions that they make. If they go in there and they say, "Oh, we're real good guys. We're going to take care of the communities and we're going to appease them and we're not going to mess up their aesthetics," and then they get the permits and they do whatever they want and there's no repercussion for that, they can continue doing what they're doing.
So the statute provides that the poles can to be here. Let me get the exact. The height for a new utility pole, so this is a new pole in the area, is limited to the tallest existing utility pole as of July 1st, 2017, located in the same right-of-way, other than a utility pole for which a waiver has been granted. If there is no utility pole within 500 feet, the authority shall limit the height of the utility pole to 50 feet. So it's either 50 feet or no taller than the highest in the area.
Okay, so maybe what we should do is we should install like 6-foot poles around the neighborhood.
I have a question, Javier, not to get like a little in the weeds on this, but I remember when we were working on the underline and we were doing the fiber, how would the installation of undergrounding fiber impact the access? Like, is there a way to introduce a new form of infrastructure that would then make this infrastructure irrelevant or necessary?
So my limited knowledge on this is that fiber, by introducing underground fiber, leads to more poles. You need the pole to be located, or the repeater up on the tower, to get your Wi-Fi signal exposure. So that's my limited knowledge on this. So, Crown Castle has a race to underground fiber throughout the county. And then the next piece of it, or the phase two, is this putting the poles and the repeaters where you can broadcast the signal.
Right.
So
It's all about bandwidth, right? With respect to 5G, the reason that they're installing it is because A has more bandwidth and B goes faster. The reason it goes faster is because it's a shorter wave, which means it's going to go a shorter distance, right? So they won't install these on copper because it doesn't go fast enough. And once you get the fiber, then these will come, because that's how, they are mutually beneficial to each other.
Is there anything that says that when 5G becomes obsolete, that these poles have to come down?
No, but that would be an important request to our legislators, because one of the issues that we have as we underground electric, for example, is that there is no obligation to take down the old poles because they may be used by AT&T or by Comcast, So one of the issues that we're having in the areas that are undergrounding is that the state does not require the removal of the infrastructure. So maybe that's an easy ask, right? From the state is, listen, we would like more control in terms of where these things are placed. And then we would also like kind of future looking that when these things become obsolete, they are removed within a certain amount of time. And then what is obsolete, right? Because similar to the poles, the electric poles that we have now, when they no longer have an occupant, they remain. So the question is, if it stops being used for a certain amount of time, do they have to take it down? And we might want to do a little bit of research, on our end on how that has worked out in other places. Even though it would be a state, we would be presenting that, as an option for our, for the state to consider that. But that's a good ask to make now, as they're starting the proliferation of poles, because I would think that not only would it give us, kind of an end to this, should the technology no longer be used, but it might also get them to consider the placement, because they're going to be responsible for the removal, which currently they're not.
Okay.
So something to think about.
I know that Sylvia had a presentation and she dropped off the call. Do you guys have anything else that you want to ask or let us know?
I think we pretty much covered all the big picture and all the big point elements. And like I said earlier, I for one got a lot of clarity on what has been occurring from your end, which I didn't have before. That gives me a lot of, let's say, a lot more.
A little bit of comfort.
Yes, comfort and hope that that some things will change. Now that you understand better, I guess, hopefully you better understand what the situation is and why we're concerned. I mean, we live in a really nice neighborhood. This isn't, it's not Gables Estates, but it's, it's a really, really nice neighborhood. Yeah. And, there's not a single pole here. People don't speed around here. It's a really nice neighborhood. And it's, aesthetically, it's getting ruined.
Yeah. And listen, like I said at the beginning, I understand your frustration, and we have been talking about it internally as to what exactly are our options, given the state mandate. And I've really appreciated this conversation, because I think we can kind of start, picking some lanes. And I think that we can create a united effort to present something thoughtful to our state legislators in terms of solutions, and then asking the Board of County Commissioners to support that, but then also making it part of our legislative priorities. And I think right now, this district is being impacted, but I think the argument could be made that, this is going to keep moving, right? It's going to keep moving into every neighborhood. It just so happens that, for the most part, it's Higgins's area and my area that have been most impacted. But I think if we come up with something thoughtful and we try to get support, I don't I don't think that we are in a situation where we can't find at least some, some compromise from Tallahassee.
Well, everyone, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to meet with us, to voice your opinions, and to listen to us. Commissioner, we will be working on that resolution together with Anari on urging the state on these different items. We may have another, maybe 2 different urgings so that they don't, because we have the polls and we have the 5G separately. So maybe it'll be 2 different urgings. But we'll definitely work on that, and we'll keep you guys in the loop. If you have any questions, any comments, concerns, Diallo and myself will be made available to you. Should you have any questions, comments, or concern after this, we really appreciate you guys taking the time.
Thank you, Anthony. Likewise, and Commissioner and everyone on staff, and feel free to reach out to any one of us if you have any questions or you want to bounce something, whatever you feel is appropriate or important. Be more than happy to stay involved in this as much as we can.
Excellent.
Yeah, I just want you to know that we're on the same team on this. We're not on adverse sides by any stretch of the imagination. And the folks who are saying that are just being divisive. And this is about finding a solution, not finding a wedge issue.
Trust me, I am well aware of that now. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good